We're honored and privileged to have Professor Stephen Fine, the Dean Professor of Jewish History and founding director of the Yeshiva University Center for Israel Studies, who's going to speak to us about his book, The Menorah from Bible to Modern Israel. And I'm not going to say much more other than to thank Eleanor Blumet for planning this and promoting this, and to say that of all the wonderful things in the book, the one thing that I take with me, is the description of the relief sculpture of the menorah in the Arch of Titus, which I've read lots of art history, lots of description of sculpture. I've never read anything as evocative and lasting as Professor Fine's description of that particular relief sculpture that really captures the essence of relief sculpture. So, I won't say any more, but rather introduce our guest speaker. Please help me welcome Professor Stephen Fine.
Hi, everybody. Hi, come sit up close. Why do libraries are my home away from home, you know? Sometimes it comes to my home on a regular basis, and then I get messages saying, give back the books. But it's my home away from home, and it's a place where my students live and where I live, and where our culture comes together and is stored and made available by awfully nice people, and awfully capable people. And so I'm really happy to be here with you and with my friends in the library and colleagues and students to talk just a little bit about my new book. Now, it's not often that you get a new book. They come every few years after quite a bit of toil and wondering and worrying and typos and typos that find their way into print. But it's a whole lot like having a baby, having been part of that once or twice. It's about taking something that I created and wondering if anybody else is going to find it interesting. And so thank you all for starting us off. Now, what I'm going to do tonight for the next few minutes is tell you just a little bit about the volume itself, which was published by Harvard University Press in November. It's the hardest book I ever wrote because of audience. Because at the same time that I wanted it to be new and cutting scholarship and thinking about something we think we know but in a way we didn't know it, I wanted my mother, may she rest in peace, to have been able to pick up the book and read it. And I wanted my friend in college, who was going to become a Jesuit except he got married, to be able to pick up the book and read it. And I wanted my friend who's a physicist in San Diego, who isn't religious at all, to be able to pick up the book and read it. Right? And everybody to gain and to be able to be brought into the conversation, some of which can be pretty staunchly philological, and others of it I try to be somewhat lighter. And that balancing act within one volume was so much fun. And that's the bottom line. Just so much fun trying to figure out how to say this in a way that anybody can enjoy it, yet someone who knows something about the subject can say, oh, that's why he did that, and oh, that's why he did that. And so Harvard actually let me put footnotes, but that was after a fight. They wanted bibliographic essays at the end. Now, bibliographic essays are great things. I have 35 pages of bibliographic essays. This is why I said what I said. This is what's good in the literature. This is what's bad in the literature. This is what you might want to look at. This is what you might not want to look at. There are places where you can actually have a conversation with people. But they, in the end, allowed footnotes because you have to be able to put Zechariah chapter 9 somewhere. Right? You have to show where the sources are. And so you can go through the whole book and not read a single footnote, and it won't make a difference to your life. But if you don't read the bibliographic essays at the end, you don't get to find out why I did what I did when I did it, and where you get to go further to learn more. And that was the fun part. Now, in writing this book,
I like to say, this is a quote, that the history of the menorah is a story of a single significant symbol. It's a hard word, symbol. I'm not sure what it means. It is as much a story of discontinuity, of cultural twist, and turns of profound significance. It's the story of memory created and recreated, of a past forgotten and sometimes re-remembered again and again. In other words, it's continuity, kind of. Or it's change under the guise of continuity. But, as you know, this symbol meant something very different for Winston Churchill than it did for Saddam Hussein. And it meant something very different walking down Madison Avenue in the 1960s than it did for either of those. And it even meant something different for the Jewish liberals than it did for the socialist liberals and the Catholic liberals, right? In other words, everybody looks at the same symbol but sees something somewhat different again and again and again. And that's what's so interesting about this process. Now, the process of doing the menorah started out at the Arch of Titus. And I'm going to show you a video that some of you, sorry, I will go back. Oh, I'm going to get it. There, I got it. May have seen, and we'll talk it through now. Come on, video. Come on. There you go. I got it. Okay, so in 2012, I was fortunate enough to take a team right here to the Arch of Titus. Americans, Italians, Germans, and Israeli. And they gave us permits to scan the arch and look for color. Now, why would we think of looking for color in such a place, a monument that was built in memory of the Jewish War, one of the best preserved of all Roman monuments? Why? Because Christians cared about it throughout history, and Jews have cared about it throughout history, and it sat there. And even in 1821, when the church reasserted itself after the reforms of Napoleon, it was rebuilt. Now, I was interested in this thing, this panel, the menorah panel, the scrolls panel. And what we did was first simply look at it up close, which is what we're doing right now. And as you know, our knowledge of this panel is not just based upon the panel itself, but based upon the Jewish historian Josephus, Flavius Josephus, who wrote the story of how the holy objects were brought into Rome, and tells us of the golden menorah and the golden table and how they were brought there. Now, what our team did was scan this panel from up close. Now, nothing this important had ever been scanned for color, but it's possible to use a scanning device and find it, which is exactly what we did. It's a little dab of yellow. Now, what always surprises me about this image is that for 3 little dabs of yellow, as we'll see in a second, we made the New York Times and all international press. And that's the yellow. Why is that important? Because in the cracks of the stone that hadn't been cleaned, right way down deep, if you ever painted a garage door again and again and again, no matter how much you sanded, the previous paint is still there, right? The previous paint is still there. And so the paint that was there from the start, slowly but surely sat there. Now, we went looking for the yellow. We figured if we found yellow, that would be a pretty good indicator that the colors were the right colors, because we're looking at the golden menorah. Right? We had very little time. And so we were only able to find the yellow. But once we knew that the thing was colored, there it comes, like that. Right? The question is, what could we do with it? This is a 3D scan that we created. It's going to be reproduced at 1:1. That's the color reconstruction of the parts that still exist of the Arch of Titus panel. Right? Now, the writing on the signs, we added. It's based upon Josephus' description of what should be written on the signs. This is the panel after we began reconstructing it. Notice a couple of interesting things. We fixed the menorah, based upon Roman cups. We added text. We fixed the Shulchan. It had never been seen before. Based upon the scan, we could find elements of the Shulchan Aruch HaPanim and reconstruct it. The only color here that's real is the color of the menorah. Everything else is taken from Roman art. Okay? In other words, Roman parallels of the time. This arch is reconstructed based upon other architectural stuff that was found on the Forum, or on the Palatine actually. We put the green here and simply followed the baseline, because otherwise we would have created a line right through their knees, and that seems silly. But we didn't try to be master artists. We tried to give a sense of the colors. That's the important part. Next thing. You see all these heads? This guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and this guy. He made them. Okay, we'll see in a moment. Oh. Did I just blow it? I just blew it. Come on, Mousey. Come on. Come on. What did I do wrong? Come on.
Back at the top of the water.
What?
Then he brought his back over the top.
Okay, got it. Go back. There's one. There's two. Good. Now it's just turning back again. Sorry. This mouse doesn't have a mouse pad. So let's go through. Just go. Good. Okay. Now we're back again. Now, again, thank you. Candelabra of the Jews, we made that up. It's Latin, but we took it off of the Latin translation of Josephus. But it had to say something. The dolphins on the top, well, only one of those dolphins exists. The other one we reconstructed. I know they don't look like dolphins, right? Those look like flicker, but those are what Romans saw when they saw dolphins. Okay? Now, of course, the head that's the only three-dimensional head that still exists. And so we took him, and through the magic of all of this, formed him, and created Clone Wars. Right? Now, remember that these are all Romans carrying this stuff. The Jewish myth is that they're Jews, but they're not. And they certainly look like Romans, don't they? Again, the table and the cups on top we were able to reconstruct based upon stuff that exists. Okay. And that's what it looked like. Now, if you come to YU Museum on September 10th, you'll see this panel fully reconstructed and fully painted. Except first you'll see the... First you'll see the panel as it was. Then you'll see the reconstructed panel. Then you'll see the polydrome panel in one-to-one. And that would be awfully cool because the exhibition opens up again on September 10th. Now, looking standing up there at the arch, I'd like to point out, and this is what I wrote in the book, and here I was, face to face with the greatest of all Jewish symbols, the menorah of the Arch of Titus. After a few minutes, it became clear to me that my almost mystical ascent up this scaffolding, which is not so safe feeling if you're a person who's not used to scaffolding, right? It became clear to me that my almost mystical ascent up the scaffolding, which I climbed in record time, was far more than a dispassionate academic trek. Let me tell you a secret, there's no such thing as a dispassionate academic trek. Anybody who thinks there is, isn't a real academic. Because we all have our things that we want to find. We all have that Indiana Jones moment, whether we're biologists or whether we're chemists or whether we're English professors. There's always that thing that drives us forward, right? When Freud went there in 1913, he wrote to a friend of his, and he wrote back and he said, "The Jews survived it." This became a major monument of Europe. In fact, it became a statement of Jewish identity in the modern world, especially after pictures of the arch started finding their way to Eastern Europe, starting in the 1880s. And so we have all sorts of famous Jews coming to this arch. And what did they do? They said something the equivalent of, "Titus, you're gone, but we're still here. Am Yisrael Chai." If you could write on the bottom, "Am Yisrael Chai." A woman that I told us gave this lecture a long time ago in Westchester told me how she brought her little boy and had him urinate on it. Jews have this really odd relationship. Yeah, the Italians weren't happy either. Jews have this very odd relationship. The Satmar Rebbe, according to one of the folk tales, went there too. But when he found out that the Italian Zionist Jews were making a fuss over it, he got back in his car and went away. That's how Satmar both appropriates the standard Jewish story but makes it its own, right? There's a Lubavitcher who went here recently and said, "Das ist nicht der erste Menorah." This is not the real menorah. Pointing at the arch, and showed the Lubavitcher Rebbe's menorah, and then he danced around. This is a place where our kids go and they sing Shir Malot, right? This is a very powerful point, to the point that the Italians have put special protection on it, like, because it's now a Jewish monument. Yeah. Don't worry. Anyway. But I found myself fidgeting and thinking about the humiliations that my ancestors had felt here of the rabbis and the simple Jews who came to peer up at the menorah from below, of modern Jews humiliated here by the church. Because they used to have to come here and greet the new pope, and he would say something like this: "I respect this, but not you." And then he'd throw the Torah scroll on the ground. The Italian Jews, on the other hand, had their ways of fixing it. So, for example, they had plaques that they put up that say, "Welcome Pope," with all different psukim, with all different biblical verses, except in the Latin, it's a perfectly good pasuk. In Hebrew, if you read it through Chazal, it's some sort of curse. And they did this consistently. Some of those signs will be in the exhibition at William Museum. I found myself thinking of the Holocaust survivors who came to this place in a massive demonstration in 1947 in support of the UN partition plan, which went. These symbolically carried the menorah home, and in 1945, the Arch of Titus menorah became the symbol of the renewed state of Israel. This is really cool. Does anybody own one of these medals? They're the most popular Israel government medal either. They're called Israel Liberata. Okay? They are the opposite of Judea Capta. Judea was captured in 70. It is restored in 1948. See the palm tree with the Roman and the crying Jewish girl. Here you see the happy Jewish woman and her husband or whatever planting a tree. And here you see, since Jews historically have believed that these people on the arch are Jews and not Romans, the ancient Jewish soldiers becoming Tzahal. It's an amazing myth. All of this in a place full of rocks. Or this, right up the street in Park Avenue Synagogue, Nathan Rappaport's image of this Holocaust memorial, redemption, with the angels flying above as a kibbutznik and a soldier and another kind of worker carry the menorah back to Zion. And you notice it's going the opposite direction of the Arch of Titus, as has been a Jewish thing to do since 1947, carrying the menorah home. The drawings, the preparatory drawings, are at the Hashomer HaZeir archive outside of Tel Aviv, and they're coming to our exhibition too. There you go. I even empathized with those Jews who today passionately believe a new myth, one that suggests that the menorah is somehow hidden in the bowels of the Vatican. In case you're wondering, it isn't. I wrote 2 chapters on that subject. And even with those misguided and dangerous Jewish nationalists who hope to rebuild the temple and restore the menorah with their own hands. Now, here we are up by the rocks. But the book goes farther. It goes through the world of Chazal, through late antiquity. This is an example of a menorah from Asia Minor that had a cross bashed over it. It's the only example we have of Christians destroying a Jewish site in the 5th century. But it's a standard menorah, the sort that you can find anywhere in the Roman world. Or this menorah on the left, which isn't the menorah at all. It's a lampstand from the year 1000 from Germany. Now, this menorah from the city of Essen was created for this church by an abbess named Matilda. And Matilda followed the rules described in Byzantine tradition really, really well. Okay? As you can see. And if you look at the bulbs, the kaftovim, they are even inscribed with patterning. See it? Now, I point out that Christians and Jews were using the same drawings around the 1000s. Jews were thinking about it. Christians were creating images. They somehow acquired that Jewish sense of rounded branches that goes back to Philo and Josephus. It's a very old Jewish tradition to have rounded branches. The rounded branches represent the paths of the 7 known planets, the 5 known planets plus the sun and the moon through the sky. It's a very old notion of construction of the menorah. And Jews were thinking in similar ways. This is a manuscript of Rashi. It was made within 100 years of Rashi's death. It's at Oxford. And you can see he wasn't as good an artist, whoever copied the Rashi drawing. But Rashi had a drawing in his text. Many of our printed texts don't have the drawing because the printers didn't know how to put drawings into their books. Okay? Very often what Rashi will say, it looks like this, and then there's no drawing. Especially in dealing with... Kobe, can you stop taking pictures? Kobe! That's my boy.
Well, I'm actually recording.
Stop. They're already recording you. Now, notice the interior of the menorah. You see this patterning? Rashi refers to this as niella work. Niella work means that there's an incision made in the metal, it's filled with enamel, and it's heated, and that's how he believes the menorah was decorated. That is a typical mode of decoration in Rashi's world, and we see it on the Christian menorah over here. In other words, the relationship between the two communities, even in the High Middle Ages, or especially in the High Middle Ages, comes out even iconographically. Or this tradition that developed with a very bad artisan named Moses, son of Maimon, who couldn't quite stay in the lines, and wanted to draw a menorah, and wanted to make bulbs, but didn't know how to make bulbs. Okay? But didn't know how to make bulbs. And so says, well, they're supposed to be sort of like eggs, but I don't know how to make eggs, so I'm going to make dots. Tells you I don't know how to draw. Okay? But a man named Yosef Kappa, who was, among other things, my next-door neighbor in Jerusalem, found this drawing and knew of other Yemenite drawings that had followed this drawing made by the Rambam himself and said, no, this is the original menorah. Now, I go through in great detail why he thinks that, what the strengths of that approach is, and what the non-strengths of that approach are. But in general, Jews for 2,000 years have believed that the menorah has round branches, except for maybe one man in the Middle Ages, Avraham ben Rambam. I'm not sure what the Rambam thought, but Avraham ben Rambam thought that his father thought the menorah had straight branches. Yemenites believed that it had straight branches. In the modern period, where the Arch of Titus menorah became so popular, rabbis who didn't like the Arch of Titus menorah because it didn't look like the menorah described by Chazal preferred this one. And hence, the most famous menorah of the second half of the 20th century. Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Ooh. Ooh. Let's keep going. Good. The symbol of the State of Israel. The symbol of the State of Israel is the second most important Zionist menorah. The most important Zionist menorah was this one. The hat pin of the Jewish Legion during World War I. It was created by Vladimir Jabotinsky for his fighting unit, eventually given to the British. This is the chaplain of the British Army. It says Kadima on the front, on the bottom, that's their Sisma, their logo. This was the first menorah ever given precedence by a government. It was given power by the British government as the official symbol of the Jewish Legion, the first Jewish fighting force since Bar Kokhba. And so it got all sorts of power, and that's what led it to be chosen as the symbol of the state. But again, this man will see none of it. Because the Lubavitcher Rebbe is the anti-Zionist who is in fact a Zionist. In other words, anti-Zionist in that you can't have two messianic systems. Pro-State of Israel, sure. And so the way he constructed his ideological statement was whatever the Israelis did, he did the opposite. Hence, the Israelis take the Arch menorah, he found his own. And so this is a form of response to Zionism that he went looking for Kapach's commentary, which eventually led to this fascinating decision at 770 in 1994, which is spread by wildfire, and then through the frum world. How's it spread through the frum world? Since the Torah doesn't describe the shape of the menorah, it must be, based upon Occam's razor, that the branches are straight. Right? Well, guess what? Josephus and Philo described the shape of the menorah. The rabbis described the shape of the menorah only in terms of describing the constellations. Archaeology shows the shape of the menorah. It was never straight until the Rambam couldn't draw very well and made his own drawing. And then it spread from there. But for the Lubavitcher Rebbe, this is a new approach. This is a menorah, which is a symbol of the Jews, but ain't the one Ben Gurion came up with. It is not the one that Jabotinsky came up with. And that's the key. Now, having said all of that, if the Romans hadn't commemorated their victory in the Arch of Titus, we wouldn't know the shape of the menorah of the temple. By the way, that's not true. But Yehuda Amichai is allowed. But the shape of the Jews we know, because they begat and begat right up until me. In other words, a rock is a rock, but the Jews are eternal. He's playing on that Am Yisrael Chai notion. Now, of course, this is a drawing by Mark Caldwell from his terrorism portfolio. The reason I included it in my book was very simple. The end of the book, which deals with the Israeli radical right and its use of the menorah today, gets sort of dark. It gets sort of scared. And I wanted something colorful and bright. Little did I know that Mark Caldwell created this image for his Holocaust portfolio because he too wanted something bright at the end of his rather sad story. In this sense, the history of the menorah is a test case for thinking about symbols and ideas and institutions and relationships that appear to be timeless, and a challenge to maintain relationship with our root symbols even as our culture reaches toward its next inevitable stages. In other words, what I tried to do with this book was tell a story of an object over 3,000 years, the oldest symbol in Western civilization. It's an astonishing thing that there's a symbol of Western civilization that's existed for 3,000 years. But it means something different when Samaritans use it, from when Karaites use it, from when Christians use it, from when Byzantine Christians use it, as opposed to Protestants in Baptist churches, as opposed to modern Orthodox Jews and Satmar. And we all use it. What does that mean when Temple Emmanuel uses it, and Satmar uses it, and the Samaritans use it, and your passport, if you're Israeli, has it stamped right on the front? What does it mean? It means something different in different places. And it's that continual unification that comes with using the same image, that peace sign. Right? But at the same time, hides, covers, protects, and allows for transformation. What do we do in a world that's changing so fast? And for me, that was the underlying sort of thematic of the project. What do we do in a world that's changing so fast? How do we keep connectedness to what matters? We're a religious community. What do we do about maintaining connectedness to what matters and at the same time doing new things? I tell my students that Reformed Jews change, conservative Jews evolve, and Orthodox Jews develop. Now, those are all three different ways of describing a world that's not the same as it was yesterday. What do you do with that? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that? Right? And when I belittle by saying, well, those are all three different words for the same thing, what I'm saying is that that sense of Klal Yisrael, the one that's sort of hidden under the branches of the menorah, is one of the places that I like to live and that my book, I think, lives to. Okay? So, Lenore, what do we do next?
Sharon's Hess, who's a reference librarian in town, is going to engage the speakers in questions, and then we'll open the floor to everybody else.
Where do we go here?
Yeah.
Can we turn on the lights?
Yes.
that was so fascinating. I have to say that I read the book, watched, and I'm still learning. I thought I knew it all, but so.
But that color stuff happened after the book.
Oh,
You notice those images weren't in the book?
yeah.
It's because we didn't finish them until just before Pesach.
Oh, okay. So it's an evolving, developing. So you mentioned in your book that you have been fascinated with menorah a very long time. So tell us about that. When it started, this fascination for us.
The problem is I tell the story differently every time.
Okay.
Because there are different pieces to the story. Right? But for me, I like menorahs. I've always liked menorahs. I've always liked the lamps lit on time. Every time that since I was this big, right? Those candles, which they told me are from the menorah of the temple. Because we have a thing called a menorah. We don't think about Chanukiah, right? In other words, the term Chanukiah sort of separates the menorah from the menorah. And so I grew up with this menorah. And then I was, 7 years old? No, I was 9 years old when the Six-Day War started. And for a lot of people who are exactly my age, that was the moment we saw our parents cry about a country 10,000 miles away that we felt some basic attachment to, but not too much, because we were Americans. And that's when all of our parents broke into tears and ran to shul, right? And all of a sudden, I come from a small community. We were using Israeli pronunciations, and there went the Ashkenazis, right? And there was this menorah again. And in that moment, I found myself doing menorahs, and they never quite left. I was lucky. I was in high school. I had an advanced placement art history course. And growing up in San Diego, California, with 3,000 Jewish families at the time, there was no day school. They taught Hebrew at our public high school. And so I was taking this advanced placement art history course with every Madonna you can imagine, right? Nice for a boy with every Madonna in the universe going across the screens. I loved it. But we got to the point where we were doing these papers for the advanced placement test. And I didn't know what to do. And the teacher looked at me and said, why don't you do something Jewish? Like, boy, we only mean in school, right? Why don't you do something Jewish? And I just come back from one of the very first high school trips to Israel. Remember those? They were pretty new when I was a kid. And I, again, see my menorahs. And I went to this place called the Od Kedumim where they had a plant that they called the menorah plant. I wrote about it sort of in books, but I still love it. And I came back and wrote a paper on, which I didn't know was anything special, but they thought it was. I compared what's written in the Torah to what artists did with what's written in the Torah. And I didn't know that because I came from nowhere. That kind of scholarship had never happened. That there's a one for one. How does an artist read the Bible? It just was new. And so here I was legitimized for my menorah craziness. And so it continued year after year. So when I went to the Hebrew University as a junior in college, and Professor Dov Noy, the great folklorist, asked me what I wanted to do. I said, I want to work in Judaica. And when I got there, they said, what do you want to do? I said, I want to work with menorahs. And in fact, I read Mordechai Narkis's book, Menorah Hanukkah, which is 1939. They said, you read that? I said, yeah. He said, it's in Hebrew. I said, I know, it's really hard. And they kept me. Because who walks in and says, hello, I read this book from 1939, and it's the whole history of the menorah, and won't you let me stay? And they did.
And you learned in Hebrew in public.
Yeah. I had good teachers. But the point is that some of my best students at Yeshiva College are the ones that started with an all over the bed and came through and built. I brought a woman from Duke University, Laura Lieber, to teach once my students in a lecture. Laura's a Reform rabbi. She started in the Ulpan in Kita Aleph Minos, and now she's an expert in Pinut. And here's these kids who've gone through 13 years of day school and 5 years in yeshiva, and their Hebrew was half as good as hers, and they couldn't really understand the routine. So it has nothing to do with where you come from. It has to do with you. Because some people come through high school and they can only do high school one. And so, I don't say that.
with greatest respect for my kids from either direction. But for me, this menorah thing has been a fascination. So the joke is that every one of my books has a menorah on the cover, but I never noticed. Right? Each book got a menorah. And then at a certain point, I realized, oh my God, they all have menorahs. And how did I realize it? Because somebody on Facebook said, Steve, another book with another menorah? I hadn't noticed. And so it's one of those things. I just do menorahs. I tried to get menorah men at Gmail.
So of all the kalim, why did the menorah become the iconic Jewish symbol? Because you've been talking about the shulchan and some other kalim. Why the menorah?
You saw the shulchan, what it looks like, right? The original.
Well,
it looks like a table, right? I mean, that's nice light, but it's essentially a table, right? And in fact, a table is a table is a table, even if it's a nice table. And not only that, if I were to knock off 3/4 of this thing, you wouldn't know it was a table. If I were to knock off 3/4 of the image of the menorah, and it's just those little pieces of branches, it ain't nothing else, right? It became central for the same reason that it's the real thing, Coca-Cola or the Golden Arches. In other words, these objects are so wonderfully unique and branded that it couldn't be anything else. That's why other people take it on every so often. So Muslims in the 8th century, well, if they're going to do something for the temple, what looks more like that Jewish thing than this, right? And to different kinds of Protestants today, when they want to show that they're like Judaizing. So menorahs are always it.
Where do they get pure gold? Because I know it's very emphatic in the Torah that has to be made of pure gold. Where was that obtained?
Let me ask a different question. When it says 100% pure on the package label, and then it says OUD on it, what does that mean? It means for the FDA, for the Food and Drug Administration, that is as pure as it can get, right? But for the Kashrut authorities, there are different things that are measured, right? Pure gold is not pure gold. Pure gold is what's been legislated to be pure gold. Gold has to have something added to it, otherwise it's like silly putty. And so whether it's copper that makes it reddish, or silver that makes it whitish, right? Or other possible shades. Anybody ever see a Mexican gold coin? It has a lot of copper in it. It's reddish, right? As opposed to an American gold coin, which has a lot of silver and tin in it, and so it's yellow, right? And so pure is in the eyes of the culture. Except no one ever asked the question of the Torah. By the way, Mr. Torah, what do you mean by pure gold? Because it was taken as a given that that's something that smelters know.
Like the original menorah that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even know how to make because he had to see it, throw into the fire or whatever Rashi said, and then that Hashem made it. That wasn't pure gold. I looked at it miraculous.
Well, there are a number of midrashim. They all show up in the temple. There are others. So, for example, next to that one is the midrash that Betzalel made the menorah and Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't, because like Moshe ben Maimon, who was apparently not a visual learner, and so Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't make it, and so he acts really petty, which he sometimes does in the midrash, and says, Betzalel, you were sitting in the corner looking. You couldn't have done that on your own. You were sitting Betzelkel. Right? In other words, we have a bunch of midrashim that deal with this problem of Oreva aser ka'asher re'iticha al har. Do what I showed you on the mountain, and then how do you make this thing? Right? So the midrashim tried to resolve that. Right? And so it was shown to him in flames or came out of a blob of gold or the rest of it are Chazal dealing with the fact
that they don't live in the Middle Bronze period and don't understand the technology of the Middle Bronze period. Now, when Carol Myers, who does understand the technology of the Middle Bronze period, wrote a dissertation called The Tabernacle Menorah, she was able to show that that tabernacle menorah that's described in the Torah fits with the technology of the 13th century BCE. Bingo. Okay? And so that's a really good example of our ability to see being limited by our own world. In other words, if I told my grandmother that I'm going to turn on my Apple, right? She would look at me like, what are you going to do to it before you take off the stem? Right? Or if I tell my students about a samovar, I was teaching Shalom Aleichem, I mentioned the samovar, right? They would look at me like I was out of my mind. What's a samovar? Right? And so it's this technology transfer and translation that even makes the word menorah mean something different for Zechariah than it means for Shlomo. Right? Thank you.
We're going to open up the floor. Why don't we keep count of the time? Well, I just read, because I did further research because I was so fascinated with this. I saw an article in the Jerusalem Post from January 3rd, 2017 about hikers who found engravings of menorah in the Judean Shvilach cistern. What do you make of what we found?
Well, you find menorahs everywhere. That's a pretty ugly one. If you saw the drawing, that's a pretty ugly
Stick
one.
figure.
I got an email the other day from some guy who was hiking in some park and he found a rock with a menorah on it. And he asked me what I thought. And I said, it's a funny park for it to be in because it's in the wrong region. You don't usually find Jews in that region. But let's find out. So he was off to the archaeologist at the same time he was off to me. And of course the archaeologist said, I'm going to go look at it. And we haven't heard anything about it since. It may show up next time. They're always finding a menorah somewhere. They just found one in Caesarea that they made an awfully big fuss over.
So there's nothing unique about what these hikers found then?
There's always something unique. But the best unique is when it's the pattern.
When it's in...
The best kind of sickness to have is the one that everyone else has, not the unique one. And as a historian, sometimes finding things that are the same can be just as important as finding things that are different. So, for example, to stake out where people of a particular religious group live, right? Finding the same over a broad region or a small region can be interesting. Or menorahs with slight variations can be more interesting now that we have so many of them, right? Than none.
Yeah, speaking of which, you were talking about the shade, obviously that's a big focus. So, Rashi says something like Akala so, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right, that it's like
It's Al-Hassan, yes.
Okay.
No, it doesn't mean, but you know what? It doesn't mean...
I didn't have anything to go.
All right, sorry, how do you say that? Al-Hassan, you told me. How do you say it in Israeli?
What's the word?
Diagonal.
Al-Hassan,
yes.
Yeah. See, again, I didn't get it.
I know, that's what I
For the
said.
second time, yeah.
So look, here's the deal. In Chazal talk, it means a line that connects between there and there. Okay? But when Jews started making geometry books, okay, they give words meaning. Okay? It's a similar. It's a wonderful essay by a guy named Evan Zohar. It's about Evan Zohar. And it's called What Did Glickle Eat and What Did Something Else Cook? I forget what it was. And here's the story. You can talk about Kahor, blue, and Tachelet, blue, all you want. But when you have to stamp one on a crayon, you have to make a decision. Right? In other words, you can't constantly build a culture on the notion that, well, it might mean this and it might mean that, V'yesho ring, V'yesho ring, V'yesho ring, V'yesho ring, and what do I tell my kid that thing is? Right? The most fun in the world must have been to live in Israel in the 1920s and have to make up words all the time. And then realize that people were going to follow them and use them. right? And I studied this. I had a dream about one of those last night. People, Eliezer Ben Yehuda and Zucchini making up a word for an object. And I was thinking about this. I was sleeping. What utter fun it must have been to be like Adam and Chava and give names to everything, right? What's utter fun? Now the problem is that these words change meaning over time. And so if you live in Chazal time, diagonal means anything that connects these two things. It can be curved, it can be straight, right? But if you have to make a geometry book for little kids like Zori Gadassi in school, it has to say, this is this. Now I point out that the person who's pushed this diagonal thing strongest is a guy who was a draftsman named Menachem Mendel Schneerson. But when Rashi's students talk about that, they don't use that word. They say, oh, it's sort of like the branches of a tree. Oh. And then when Chazal do it, they don't know what to do. They say, Mikan v'holech, holech ve'elech, which means, from here it sort of goes up. Right? They don't have a word for kishti. It doesn't exist till about the 11th century. Right? Arch. It doesn't exist till the 11th century. Is that not cool? And so they're struggling for words up to more or less the time of Rashi and beyond. And then they develop the word. Now, the reason I go through that business with Ben Yehuda and all of that, with making up words, is that we sometimes forget how constructed our culture is. Why is the stuff that comes out of the wall called chashmal? Because of the chariot of Ezekiel. Right? Somebody in the 1920s said, that's like lightning. Let's call it chashmal. Or why is that thing that takes soldiers across the Golan Heights called a Merkava? Because of Yechezkel also, right? In other words, we forget all of these resources. Or why is that place where you get off the road to go to Bar Ilan called Solet Nisugim? Anybody know? Because right next to that crossroad is the historical site of the city of Bnei Brak.
Where they lead.
Where they lead. That's right. It is, and you can go from place to place, from street to street, and play the game that I just played. But when we realize then how utterly considered, why is it called a Mageddon and not some other noun? Because Ben Yehuda decided. Why is it called Umanut, art? Because people decided that and started writing it in magazines. Ben Yehuda says so in his dictionary. And so when diagonal means diagonal, and sometimes means diagonal, and in a world where we measure everything, right down to the watch that Ellen was using to make sure we finish, right? Down to the seconds that we keep, right? Remember, we're on Jewish time, so we can go over it a little bit. But besides that, why is Jewish time? Because our culture is not used to running by the clock. There's something healthy about that. I'd like to point that out. Running by the clock, running by that horrible impingement on our religious lives, a matzah drawing that tells you how much to eat, right? When everything gets measured, right? When halakha becomes something that's made for mechanics, right? When Hebrew language becomes something that we all know what it is because it always was, well, it never always was. Is that not cool?
I'm very into English. I have Klein's dictionary, and it's all like, this is really cool.
There was a guy on television called Avshalom Kol. He had a radio and television show called He has Zman Lashon. And he has books. When you get the books on like that's advertising. And in these books, he goes through all these strange words and tells you, and you know where it comes from? Anyway.
Shall we open up to this one?
Yes.
I don't know.
Did you have to deal with the Italian government when you were working on the launch?
Yes, they were wonderful. I can say that to the camera too. They were wonderful. The Italian, to the point that the site archaeologist, Cynthia Conti, the day that we started our work, passed through the Jewish ghetto and went to the kosher bakery and got pizza for everybody. Right? They eat pizza the same way we eat, rolls, bagels. I got pizza for everybody. The Italian government provided the conservatives for free. They volunteered because they wanted this to happen. Because as you may have noticed, this institution went through a financial crisis, you may have heard. And my budget was halved the year that we were going to Rome. So I wrote to everyone, I said, I have half the money, what are we going to do? And they wrote back and said, well, you're coming to Rome. And so everybody, all the Italians, did all of this because they wanted to do it, because they were committed to doing it. Now, the Italian government now has a problem that why you think I used to have. It's not quite ours anymore. But unfortunately, it's theirs. They're going through a huge economic crisis. And so getting a permit and getting all that help is not so easy anymore. That's the point at which we decided, okay, we'll try our hands at color. And then when we finally get back someday, we'll do it. But it was at no point anything but a delight to work with them. Isn't that amazing? And I would even say that without cameras. Oh, but this is the #1 tourist site in Europe, so yes, they have to close it for us.
Sir.
A technical question. What kind of paint was applied?
We know the pigment, we don't know the chemical composition, because we can't touch it.
Okay, very
But
interesting.
Romans used, I can tell you, brown stones. So I'm sure that if I was one of the chemical people, I could say, oh yeah, it's that kind of stone that comes out as mustard, and they would just tell you that. Right? But that's a question no one's ever asked, so I never asked, but I'm not going to ask.
Thank you.
Okay. What in the 13th century? Who ruled over the Jews?
In what place? Here?
In land of Israel, Palestine.
We're not doing that question. Next.
was curious when you talked about Rambam's view of the menorah of the strip. I mean, you said it was basically a bad drawing, but did he base on his interpretation? Were there any forcing of things where
He never described, Rambam doesn't read Farsi Mal. You say it, he's Rambam. But besides that, he intentionally did these things. But he also didn't say anything about branches. He was interested in the bulbs and the flowers and all of that. He had no interest. He was just giving a holder for the order of the bulbs and the flowers and the lamps. That's all he cared about.
Yeah, but do you base on any
The rest of it he based on straight Chazal conversation or his intuition. But the shape of the point is that he never said the straight branches are what was. His son said that he believed that the straight branches are what was. I can understand why he would say that, because there is no tradition directly, clearly stated in Chazal that the branches are round. It's just one of those things that happens, like black to filling. Right? Or square to filling. It just is. Right? But since it's not written down, this has happened in our world all the time, right? Things that my grandmother did somehow all of a sudden turned trace because someone read a book. Chaim Soloveitchik wrote a great essay about this, Rupture and Tradition. It's on the Bookstein website, about Jewish cultures when they lose their sense of continuity, turn to the book. Now, he says it about Riverdale, and that's where he lives. I can say the same thing about the time of Ezra Nehemiah and the fight with the Karaites. In other words, at points where Jews get insecure or feel that they're losing that sense of organic continuity, they often turn back to books, and that leads to strange turns. Right? Like matzah measuring devices. I know exactly how much matzah to eat. You know why? My father ate just the right amount. Right? That's right. Yeah.
So I'm curious about the connection between, you said, the 7 branches and the planets and the star, the moon and the sun. So I guess that, I guess my question is, how does the menorah represent that? And do you think and how did other people at the same time represent that, or did they not bother?
I have a slide, if I can't show it, of the image of the god Fortuna, Fortune, with 7 planets on an arc on top of her headdress. Okay? Meaning the 5 planets and the sun and the moon. When Philo looked at the menorah, he saw a Ptolemy's notion of the harmony of the heavenly spheres flying through the sky, parallel to each other, never touching. Right? And so he describes it as divine music. And so the menorah as a microcosm of the cosmos. Josephus, less poetically, says the same thing. That means the idea is floated out there. It shows up opaquely in rabbi stuff, but never explicitly, and usually in late Midrashim. But I think it's floating around a lot. And that's where it comes from. Now, that's why Christians have their own branches, because they read Philo and Josephus. And Jews had this natural inclination toward round branches that goes back to the Second Temple period and was never broken until, those odd Rambam Mishnah Torah manuscripts that the Rebbe picked up on. For all sorts of modern reasons. After all, if it's not written, it must not be so. That fits our modern sort of erector set halakha. Right? In other words, halakha that doesn't take into account Masorah, but only takes into account Svara. Right? In other words, we do it because we read the book and this is what we came up with, as opposed to my Zaidi did it this way, let's talk. Those are two different approaches to halakha, as Soloveitchik writes. And so, if your instinct is that if it's not written, it don't exist, then going to straight branches is a logical conclusion. And that's, I think, why it's not going to be found in the fact. Cool. No, what you guys?
I'm trying to piece to that.
I was interested in the book when you compared the turn of the century, the early Shu, with the fact that many of the Zionists and people who embrace the image of the Mary Masons were part of the Zion. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Freemasonry. Anybody have a relative? Does anybody have a relative who was a Freemason? You must. Right? Because everybody in Egypt was a Freemason. Of course. Everybody was a Freemason. Now, every Reform rabbi, practically, was a Freemason. Most conservative rabbis, some Orthodox rabbis, all businessmen. It was the place where Jews and Christians and, Catholics, and in Egypt, Muslims and Armenians could meet on equal grounds and be members of the same organization. Okay? Huh?
It was like a Unitarian.
No, it wasn't a religion, but it does have a very strange mythology that everyone was involved. That the order was involved in the building of Solomon's temple. Now, in its British version, it was open to Jews, and in its American version, it was open to Jews. And naturally, in its German version, it closed off Jews. And so Jews had to have their own lodges called B'nai B'rith, or others similar names. Okay? Now, these lodges had really weird initiation rites, right? If you've ever seen the Shriners Parade in Philadelphia with the funny hats and that sort of odd Oriental stuff, and if you grew up with Fred Flintstone with the Grand Poobah, right? In other words, all that weird stuff that the world thinks Masons do because they do, right? Now, Jews, there was a Masonic group in Palestine from the 1860s when they took a cave and announced that this was the Cave of Solomon and ran there at Solomon's Quarry. You go to Solomon's Quarry near Damascus Gate, that was Charles Warren, who went looking for the kalim, not because he was a great archaeologist, but because he wanted to find the kalim under the Temple Mount. Okay? These are all this odd Masonic thing, and the lines between rational scholarship and rational culture and real religion and Messianic stuff and Masonic stuff get wiped away by all those rational people. But I know who in Palestine in the 20s were members of the Masonic Lodge, including David Gellin, including Bialik, including Jabotinsky. You go down the list. They were all Freemasons, okay? Yitzhak Rabin was a Freemason. They are all Freemasons. Part of this international good doers thing with this odd mythology. Okay? Now, the temple imagery was essential to what they did. If you go to Washington to the big Masonic monument to George Washington, there's a big brass menorah in there, and there's the Ark of the Covenant too. You thought it was in a warehouse because of Indiana Jones. It's not. It's at the Masonic Temple. Now, Jews who are Masons were very proud of this. And so very often Jewish Masonic lodges, which they founded not because they had to, but they wanted to, the Menorah Lodge. Right? So if you go in Brooklyn and see the Bumhover Girls' School, it has a very nice Masonic menorah on the front. The 2 or 3 years before that building was built, Chaim Weizmann gave a major address at the Menorah Masonic Lodge in Brooklyn. It is so, don't tell them to take my menorah off. They'll destroy my menorah. Why would you do that? Or, but the point is that what?
They wouldn't do that. They would just cringe. That way.
No. Weizmann wouldn't bother them. It's the. I can't tell you the places where menorahs end up without the tchotchkes on the bottom. It's ready to take over. But there's been left below. Just ignore them left below. The animals on the bottom.
Oh, right.
They end up getting taken off on parade. From place to place around the world. You can just watch it. But the Menorah Masonic Lodge is a beautiful building. The stones there are supposed to look like the temple stones of Aaron's temple. It's really wonderful. Why? Because this is the way to be modern and a member of an international thing and to be a human being like everybody else and be Jewish all at once. Right? So if you have any of that wonderful old Betzalel art, there is a Hanukkah party at Betzalel that Agnon describes in Moshe Shom. And in it, they're doing all sorts of typical 1910s Zionist, secular debauchery in Jerusalem. And the storyteller, who's a frum guy, tells the story, you know that statue that Boris Schatz made of Mattathias? Well, if he could come alive, he would go and stab them all. Right? In other words, those guys were modernists with some Jewish symbols. And the menorah gave them the cover and gave them the meaning all at once. Right? And so when we look at the symbol of the Jewish Legion, which is those guys, right? There's so much more going on than onward Jewish soldiers fighting off the war. And that's what's so interesting about this. For me, or when Rav Herzog didn't like the symbol of the State of Israel, but he let the Knesset menorah be put in front of the Knesset. Why? Because he knew he couldn't stop them. You read his letters, it's very clear. He knew he couldn't stop the Ben Gurion, and so it was better not to make a fuss. So he said, why don't you put it inside with all those images? It's not trade, but he really wanted to listen to it. And of course they didn't listen to it. They put it right in the Menorah Square in the center of the city, next to the old Knesset, right? But he kept his mouth shut because he knew he couldn't win. Or when Moses Montefiore hated the Ark of Titus Menorah, not that Montefiore, Moses Mendelssohn, excuse me, hated the Ark of Titus Menorah. Why? Because it didn't look like what Chazal said it should look like, and his people were becoming Germans, and it was a peg in the heart of Chazal to have something that the only archaeological artifact of the Jews, the most important archaeological artifact of the Jews, don't look like what Rossi said. That's awful. And so it's the only object he talks about in the entire viewer. His entire commentary on the Torah is the Ark of Titus. And I can go on for hours. But you got the point. Yes. Yeah, please.
To clarify what you said, so the plan would have been to look for color over the entire freeze, but I think that was a time and money.
Which time is that? Once you're there.
And does that go for the rest of the arch? Also,
We wanted to do all of
the
it.
entire.
We put in for money from the National Endowment to do all of it. The Italians backed it. We didn't get it. I didn't have the YU money to do it. Now, thank God, Israel Studies just received a major gift from the Leon Charney Legacy Fund. That's going to let us do all sorts of interesting things. And if the Italians will let us come back, we'll be back. But in the meantime, our guess is pretty close to right. That we know. Because we know enough about Roman art that it would be hard to follow that at this point. Please.
I'm not sure if you spoke about the base of the menorah, but if you did, what is the best educated or emotional guess as far as the shape of the base?
I once gave a lecture, I called it Basic Instincts, after a movie. The Israelis didn't get it, I don't know why. Here's the deal. There were lots of menorahs in the Second Temple. If one got too mad, another would be brought out. Okay? And so we shouldn't think of the menorah. Menorahs that were brought, and Chazal talked about this, and Josephus talks about this. This is well known. We had more than one menorah. Okay? And they put them out on holidays for everyone to see. It's in Kohen Gadol, and they tell, and the Kohanim would stand there like museum guards and say, don't touch. It did probably as much good as it does in museums. And so they have to keep dipping the menorah, okay, and putting other ones out. People gave them as presents, just like they gave the buildings as presents, right? There were gifts given to the temple, or by groups, by individuals, or whatever. Now, in the 1960s, every Jewish group in America had a booklet. And it was a guide to essentially suburban synagogues and what they could put in the shul. What kind of art they should have, how many steps they should have on the bima, what kind of supine they can put on the wall, how high the mechitza is, where there isn't a mechitza, right? Every kind of group, Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, they had these little booklets that said, this is what goes into our brand of shul. Okay? They more or less had that in my imagination for all the stuff in the temple. Right? You want to give them an menorah, this is what it looks like, blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, the Torah doesn't tell you what the base looks like. There's no description of the base. And so they can do one of two things. They can put a standard Roman base, which is a tripod. That's what a standard Roman base looks like. Or they could use a standard base of a large Roman lampstand, like the kind that sit in front of the public library right down the street, which is sort of a box. Rashi describes a box. This is a kind of box, the thing that's sitting there. I don't think that it is a addition. I don't think that there was some three-legged thing sitting under there. That's kind of a pashara that you might like if you were trying to defend Chazal. But you don't have to defend Chazal. The Second Temple menorah, this is not the First Temple menorah. This is not the Tabernacle menorah. This is the thing that Herod and company does. Right? So it doesn't need defense. And so here we have this menorah with a funny base. Yeah. And the animals? Well, everybody believes in those animals. But people thought that half animal, half horse, half fish animals existed out there in the ocean somewhere. They didn't just think they were mythological. And they knew that because they discovered dinosaur bones. And they interpreted them. And they knew there were big lizards out there. And they knew there were strange animals out there because they were digging them up out of the ground. And some of the emperors had their own bone collections. Is that not cool? And Herod had one too. Because, you know, they were finding things like dinosaur footprints. There's one that was found near Mozart recently in the last 100 years. They knew that this stuff was out there. They weren't stupid. And the question then is how you interpret it. So all those animals that are on there are not mythological. They're real animals. Except they're cool real animals. And they're celestial real animals, and they're far away real animals. In 1900, people believed that there were brontosauruses in Lake Victoria in Rhodesia. And everyone believed it. They put it in all the encyclopedias. And so, once I contextualize it in terms of what they saw when they saw animals, it feels less weird to have all those animals on the base, especially, and to throw one more piece in. It says in the Tosefta, in the early rabbinic text, in other words, they had all different animal images in Jerusalem before the Korban, except for that of a human being. And archaeologically, that has proven true. Okay? We have fishes, we have birds, no people. Okay? And so that's sort of my question, whether the base was put there by Titus or whether it was put there by Herod. The thing that I think tips the scale a little bit is that it's the same color yellow on the base as it is on the branches. And so no one tried to distinguish it. And that's the new information.
Cool.
Anybody? Thank you all.
Please let me thank Sean Hess for interviewing and Great Cloudworth for being videographer and Professor Fine for his fascinating points and explanations.
Just one more thing. All of our friends in the library who every day make life pleasant. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate